Trials of Mana was one of the most ambitious titles on the Super Nintendo. It offered some of the best sprite work that still holds up today and an interactive story. There were 6 playable characters. You picked 3 and followed one of 3 main storylines based on the leader. The game pushed the Super Nintendo hardware to its limit, for better or for worse. Looking back today though, it is a rather simple game. The combat wasn't too in-depth and the stories themselves were pretty straightforward. The way the game played out though was something pretty unique, and this combat was satisfying for how simple it was, especially in 2-player co-op. Your options for playing Trials of Mana are Seiken Densetsu 3 on the Super Famicom, the fan translation patch, the Collection of Mana on Switch, or the Trials of Mana remake released in 2020. Ultimately, the 2 flavors of this title are either the epitome of classic 2D action JRPG, or a modern action JRPG that fits in among modern games. First, let's review the legacy of the game before we jump into the remake. If you've seen my Collection of Mana video before, then this will be a bit of a repeat from the tail end of that video. Seiken Densetsu 3 was released on the Super Famicom in 1995, but it was never officially localized for the Super Nintendo, supposedly due to the game's complex programming. Localizing the game would have been far too costly at the time. There were also concerns that with the game's bugs, if Nintendo of America would have certified it. In 2000, a fan translation project was released that was faced with limitations. On top of the game's complexity, they had to keep the ROM size constrained. Regardless, the fan translation was still an impressive feat, and it was one of the first ever fan translations of a game, and it definitely showed the West's interest in the title. The Collection of Mana on Nintendo Switch released in 2019, and it holds the most accessible version of the original Trials of Mana. This was the first official localization made available, and it took about a year, requiring Nintendo support on the technical side of things. Limitations such as text size and file size were irrelevant now, despite still actually being a simple Super Nintendo ROM. Now, many of the terms and character names in the fan translation are different from the official localization. If you're interested, the community has actually constructed a compendium of terms between the 2 versions. The purpose of this was for players of either version to be able to converse. Also, many online guides were written for the fan translation, so the compendium will help you understand those guides if you're playing the Collection of Mana version. Now, let's get into Trials of Mana, released in 2020 for the PS4, Switch, and Steam. While the content, story, fundamental mechanics such as the day and night cycle, and even the script remain pretty one-to-one, many aspects are remade from the ground up and bugs eradicated. The remake additionally offers a new post-game dungeon, new game plus, a new class tier, dozens of new party interactions and cutscenes throughout the story, and many quality of life adjustments. The original Trials of Mana had some mildly unresponsive combat. You had 2 buttons for battles, attack and tech. To attack, you don't have to mash the attack button, but you actually just have to hold it. You also had a dash and limited control over your party members. In the remake, the gameplay has more depth to it and is more in line with a modern action JRPG. You've got light and strong attacks that combo, as well as dodge and jump buttons, along with 3 different dash options from tapping the button to automatically dashing. Magic and items no longer pause gameplay. Class strikes, which are text from the original, play a quick cutscene, but those are nowhere near as intrusive. The original had a storage system that items went to when you had more than 9. Basically, you could hold 99 stacks of items, but you can only have access to 9 of them at a time. After battle, you would have to press start and pull items out of storage and onto your person. In the remake, storage works differently. Your 99 stack is immediately accessible from the ring menu outside of battle, but in battle, it is still restricted to 9. Beforehand, treasure would drop out of enemy encounters, and there was a chance of getting a roulette wheel from a chest. Your luck stat would affect what happens here. In the remake, the roulette wheel mechanic is gone. You still get items from fights, but they're immediately put into your inventory, no chest. Additionally, items are laid out consistently among the environment. There's a lot of fixed item spots, pots, and chests around the world, so you collect items much more efficiently. Environments like towns and dungeons, enemies, and bosses have been adjusted and adapted to the open space you now have to navigate. You've got complete 360-degree camera control that you can use to your advantage. Battles take place within a ring around enemies that you can run out of to flee, similar to walking off screen in the original, and bosses and enemies now utilize mechanics such as telegraph markers, armor breaking, stagger, and DPS checks. There's so many platforming areas within towns to find items that it feels like the devs had fun hiding stuff around. Throughout your travels, you'll now come across little cactus that are hidden. The more you find, the more rewards you get. The UI is a major step up. Not that the remake is anything explicitly amazing, but the original game's UI was cluttered, clunky, and confusing to navigate. The UI in the remake being intuitive is a welcome change, making things like shopping, item management, and skill management a lot more efficient and bearable. The iconic ring menu returns in one of its more intuitive designs. The ring menu is a way to pause combat briefly to plan out attacks or use items, but you can also map options from the ring menu to some shortcuts, so you can execute moves or items without pausing the game for a moment, which makes quick use of magic much more viable. Stats work radically different between the games. In the original, you distribute a point directly into 6 stats, but some stats aren't relevant to every character. They either didn't affect them in battle, weren't necessary to access certain spells, or just didn't work properly, namely dexterity and luck. Dexterity is supposed to affect your evasion from attacks, but it doesn't. However, it is still relevant to variables in the game that make calculations using the dex stat, such as Hawkeye's techs and throwable items. Luck was supposed to affect your crit chance, but it doesn't. It does still affect your chest loot roulette. While we're on the topic of bugs, a few more of them include Kevin's beast form being broken, and speedrun tech known as stat breaking, death canceling, and attack canceling. In the remake, stats, skills, classes, and class strikes have been redone and rebalanced. You put points into training 5 specific focuses, which don't directly raise your stats. Instead, these points can be used to unlock stat upgrades, new spells, or passive abilities. Spells and passives are spread out among the focuses and unique per character, so you have incentive to train more than 1 or 2 stats per character. They've also introduced chain abilities. Chain abilities are abilities that you obtain around the world through interactions and can be equipped by anyone. In the original, there were 3 tiers of classes, totaling 7 classes per character. A class change could provide you a new look, a new tech, new spells, or access to more equipment. For example, Durant could get access to elemental shields. However, elemental shields were bugged and didn't actually provide elemental defense. In the remake, class upgrades provide a new class strike, a new combo, extended CS meter, you're able to equip more abilities, and unlock new ones to obtain. Along with changing your outfit, you can also use any of your other previous costumes you've got. And now we've got 4 tiers of classes, totaling 9 per character. And if need be, you can respec or reset your class selection later. And one of the larger points that really separate these 2 games is the lack of co-op. The original had 2-player co-op, and if you're going the route of patching the ROM, you could actually support 3-player co-op. But the remake is purely single-player. While your ways of commanding your partners are laid out more apparent, the AI still isn't too smart, so if there was an option to have a player-controlled party members in some capacity, it would have been great. Trials of Mana really is old school in the way it expects you to progress the story. With no UI or indications on where to go, you're expected to wander upon your next plot points. You're told where to go, you just aren't told how to get there. This method of exploration resonates with some players more than others. The remake, in contrast, guides you along in an extremely linear fashion. Even when the objective is to just investigate the town and ask around, you're shown exactly who to talk to. You can make a beeline through the story simply by following the markers. With the dialogue being so faithful though, you could remove all the new quest UI and navigate around the world like you would in the original. Party member interactions are more fleshed out. They don't follow you through towns anymore, so you can talk to them for some more flavor text. And in the beginning, you're given the option to play through their prologues rather than just being told them. This all brings a sense of story synergy among your party that the original doesn't. Now, with the dialogue comes voice acting. This is one of the weakest points of the remake. The voice acting's a mess.
Window is straight ahead. Come along, recruits. Follow me.
Dual audio is supported though if you'd like to have the Japanese dialogue.
このやつ、帰ったらお仕置きでち。
俺もう行く。外もう真夜中。
Also, the game holds a super boss fight. To get to it in the original, it required you to lead with either Duran or Angela. In the remake, there is no such restriction. Any party combination can access it. Seiken Densetsu 3's sprite artwork is some of the best you'll find on the Super Nintendo. Meanwhile, the remake's art style isn't as indicative of how far the medium can be taken today, though I think it still has its moments where it looks pretty good. Animations can be a mess too. Using some blatant motion capture on cartoonish models doesn't always look the best, and some bits didn't translate well from 2D to 3D, giving the original an edge in its charm for these moments. Now, as far as the OST goes, it's actually well done. Hiroki Kikuta assisted in the remastered OST. And even if it's not your thing, they do have options for the original music anyways. Now let's talk about the console differences. The Switch offers the lowest resolution at around 630p to 900p, and targets 30 FPS with limited dips below it, along with slightly more compressed FMVs. On dock, the resolution can go between 468p and 720p, and generally struggles with targeting 30 FPS. The PS4 version targets 60 FPS and is 1080p native. The PS4 Pro targets 60 FPS more consistently, and the resolution ranges from 1188p to 1400p. And then there is the PC version, which is where most of the footage is that I'm recording. Please let me vent quick. There's options for 30, 60, and 120 FPS, but only 4 supported resolutions: 720p, 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. Nothing in between, more or less. Because of this, there's no ultra-wide resolution support at all. I don't mean that it just has letterboxes on the side, I'm used to that, and that wouldn't be a big deal. I mean it literally cannot be set to a 21:9 ratio, so the game just stretches one of the 4 16:9 resolutions to fill the monitor. So if your monitor's not a 16:9 ratio, you're gonna have a problem. I do have a workaround thanks to borderless gaming and hex editing the executable, but should that really be necessary? Sorry, I hate to put impersonal bits into these videos, but I mean, this issue kinda held up the video a while. Ultimately, Trials of Mana is a comfy JRPG that resonates with the era of its release, no matter which version you play. The Super Famicom original harkens back to an older era of JRPGs, for better or for worse. The modern Trials of Mana remake is a much more polished experience, especially in comparison to the Secret of Mana and Adventure of Mana remakes before it. Making choices to separate the combat from the original and add a ton of depth to it was a great choice, though the lack of co-op is still unfortunate. The smaller budget no doubt still shows as well, but you can feel that Trials of Mana had more forward thinking put into it that paid off in the long run. And that's all I got for you today. Apologies for being a month late on this, but time goes on. If you want to support me, you can find me on Patreon, and if you want to keep up to date on projects, then follow me on Twitter. Till next time, thank you for watching.